I was shaking off my responsibilities and staying up late on an early Friday morning around 4 a.m. while procrastinating on my college work. All of my friends went to bed, and I wasn't in the mood to play any games, so I turned on the TV to see what was on. When I was channel surfing to Adult Swim for reruns, my eyes immediately caught Comedy Central playing the South Park opening sequence. Normally, Comedy Central usually plays an infomercial around that time, but I was too delighted to notice or even care. It was an earlier opening with the banjo player, but during the part where Kenny mumbles his lines, I realized the quality of the video graphics were poor and unstable, even for South Park standards. It was as if someone recorded via VHS, but little did I know, weirder things were going to happen. Usually the episode starts right after the theme song, where Ike or Mr. Hanky flies into the South Park sign. But this time, static suddenly erupted and stayed there a bit longer than usual, until the actual show started up. The actual episode started without any music at all, and simply showed Kenny walking in the streets of South Park. But it wasn't the classic hopping or skidding walk that the show was famous for, but an actual walking animation. There was no sound either, and no sound of the other boys, or any background characters for that matter, as Kenny silently walked in a loop, like out of a Flintstones cartoon. In the loop, classic locations were shown, like Tom's Rhinoplasty and Stark's Pond, and despite the geographical errors, like showing the school at one part and the movie theater after that, I shrugged it off, believing it to be the type of indirect joke that Trey and Matt are notorious for, so I decided to continue watching it. But then, after the 5-minute mark, the looping buildings started to mix away at random, and the new buildings began to appear as if on cue, showing locations such as Raisins and Casa Bonita, though neither of those would appear until later seasons. I didn't know that at the time, of course, but in hindsight it's pretty weird. A door opening was suddenly heard in the background, followed by the sounds of various people shouting and other sorts of commotion. The audio was too muffled and distorted, so I wasn't able to fully hear what they were saying. But it sounded too realistic to be an act. It sounded like a group of people were yelling at a crying woman to stop. The people were begging her not to do it, as the crying woman warns them to back off, or she'll take them with her. The screaming and begging grew louder along the way. The animation itself revealed the background changing into more realistic details. The looping buildings began to deteriorate over time, and it appeared to synchronize with the screaming. First it showed signs of neglect, like boarded doors and broken windows. And the next loop shows the structures discoloring away due to age. And it continues to loop in worse conditions than the last, as the screaming grew louder and more violent all the way until the point where all the famous landmarks were barely recognizable and falling apart. But Kenny, for whatever reason, didn't experience change at all, and not only that, he continued to walk as if nothing was happening. Both the audio and the animation lasted for another 5 minutes, during which the voices were getting clearer up until the end. Several of the voices I was able to identify and recognize, and Trey and Matt, along with Isaac Hayes, telling the crying woman to think about her husband. Trey and Matt sounded genuinely afraid in their midst. It didn't sound anything like a joke at all. It sounded too genuine to be a prank by them. I then heard Isaac telling her, "Please don't do it," before silence for a while. At this point, the animation froze, as if it was waiting for the woman's answer. Finally, the woman just barely muttered in a whisper, "I'm sorry," before a loud gunshot was heard, following a thud. Screams of help erupted. Panicked yells for help and crying was heard before the animation cut to black. Several minutes of silence had passed until the animation returned to Kenny walking again in a loop, and the background returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Only this time, after a minute or two, Kenny stopped and turned around into the viewer's direction, and walked towards me as the camera drew nearer and nearer, until Kenny was close enough that his hooded face covered the screen. His staring eyes gave me shivers, as Kenny continued to simply look at the camera's view, as if he was watching me from my own TV, never blinking at all. as if he was under a trance. They continued to do so for 4 minutes before the screen cut to black as the credits played quietly. After images of Kenny's eyes lingered in the credits until it finally faded away during the brand of airplane logo. And the screen faded to black until an infomercial started playing as if nothing happened. I don't know if the events that occurred that night were some sort of sick joke Trey and Matt played for people like me, or something far more ominous. Even as I record this, I still feel those eyes staring at me with the same haunting chill. The death that was heard on the audio was ruled as a suicide.